Welcome, everyone, to today's Better Way Thursday workshop. We're so glad you're here to join us. I am super excited about the conversation we're going to be having today with Velshay Stokes and Rachel Cottam. These are some friends that I've known for a little while, had some great conversations with, but the conversation that we're having today and the impetus for this was a recent cohort that we did at Tech Moms called Tech Moms in Color that was specifically for women of color. And it was a fantastic cohort, super successful. But as part of that, we had women in some of our other cohorts saying, we would love to learn more about being great allies and supporting our entire community, people whose lives and experiences are so different from ours. And I know that these two have a lot of experience, so many great ideas and insights to share on this topic. So I was grateful when they said that they were willing to come do a workshop with us, talking specifically about allyship and supporting each other and what it means to build a great community when we are all so different and have many different experiences and viewpoints and things like that. So I'm not going to read bios today. So I'm going to ask Velshay and Rachel to introduce themselves, but I'm just going to turn it over to the two of you to go ahead and take it from here.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Let me see if I can share my screen, and maybe while I'm doing that, Velshay, do you just want to kick off with a quick intro?
Yeah, I can go ahead. So my name is Velshay Stokes. My pronouns are she, her. I am currently a DEI programs manager. I am located in Illinois, so the good old Midwest. I've been doing this work for about 8 years, and honestly, I just thoroughly enjoy it. It impacts my everyday life. So I kind of fell into it. As I fell into it, I was like, hey, there's something here. So I really enjoy the connections I get to make, the conversations I get to have, and honestly, the knowledge I get to gain myself. So I love working with Rachel. We've done this a few times together. And I hope today is just as great as all the past events have been. So, Rachel, go ahead.
Thank you. And I'm really excited to be here too. I've loved working with tech moms and all the work that Robin does. I'm super supportive of that. I, for one, transitioned into tech from a teaching career. So I know exactly what it's like to go from a female majority career to then be the only woman in the office. And for me, that's why I'm really passionate about allyship, as I quickly found the need to build allies and to make sure that I was growing those relationships, and I was able to really learn from and benefit from my male sponsors early on in my career. So that's why I'm passionate about this work. Pronouns also she, her, based out of Utah, work in marketing, but also partner with Utah Women in Leadership Project right now to help close the gender pay gap. So that's another fun thing that I'm passionate about. So we'll go ahead and jump in. Thank you so much, Robin. We're going to go ahead and start with some community agreements, even though we know that folks are watching this at different times, since this is a pretty sensitive topic and a really important one. We think it's good to kind of set the stage first with how we want to have these conversations, not only right now in this hour we spend together, but as you move forward into the workshop, into the workplace. Velshay, do you want to share a little bit here?
Yeah, so community agreements, allies, not enemies, right? We're all here to learn from one another in one way or another. So let's keep that in mind. Celebrate the good. I know sometimes when talking about having these conversations, it can be easy to focus on the problems, but if we celebrate the good, we can really sometimes cast out all the noise. Challenge ideas, not individuals. Like I say, we're all learning together. So folks might have different ideas. It's going to have those conversations, but don't challenge the individual, because that's when the purpose kind of gets lost there. And then lastly, acknowledge that one size does not fit all. So the things we're going to talk about today, one thing me and Rachel really want to emphasize is take this and apply it to the way that it best fits you, right? It might fit you a different way than it fits me, than it fits Rachel and Robin. So take this and apply it to your life in the best way that it can fit for you. So those are our community agreements for today. And next, we're going to hop into some terminology. In order to understand a topic, you have to know the language around that topic, right? So when it comes to allyship, we want to start with the basic terminology to give you the words when you have these conversations or take part in these actions. And of course, the first word is going to be ally. To unite or form a connection or relation between, one that is associated with another as a helper, a person or group that provides assistance and support in an ongoing effort, activity, or struggle. A key part about this is also to be an ally, you must have some kind of power, which we all do in one way or another. So it's really sharing that power or that privilege that you might have with someone who may not have the same that you do. And speaking of privilege, a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. We'll dive more into privilege as we go through this. Fragility may be a word you've heard before. It's discomfort or defensiveness on the part of a person when confronted by information about societal inequality and injustice. So this can be something when having a conversation and folks can feel a bit fragile, like, yikes, this applies to me. I'm not a bad person, right? And we want to make sure we acknowledge this term so that we can help you prevent that feeling or learn how to navigate through it. Rachel, I think you're muted if you're saying something.
Thank you. We just gotta keep this real, right? We gotta remind
Yeah.
folks that we're human. One thing that I was just gonna add here is that when Velshay and I had this conversation last time, we had a few folks with kind of an aha moment here where they realized, wait, privilege isn't a bad thing, right? Privilege is not inherently evil. It can be a way for me to be empowered and to be a better ally. And I had a really similar experience around this term fragility. Again, sometimes we get defensive when we hear this term and we think, oh, that's not me, that's not about me. But for me, as I've kind of been trying to unlearn in some of the other areas, I spend a lot of time in the gender allyship space. But as I've been trying to check my own racism or homophobia or whatever that is, actually moving through this fragility and allowing myself to acknowledge some of my own biases is incredibly freeing. It's incredibly empowering because then instead of wasting all this mental energy saying, am I racist? Am I sexist? I'm able to then move on to the actual work and spend time on the behaviors that can be anti-racist or anti-sexist or whatever that looks like. So I think these terms can actually be really freeing, which I love the way Velshay sets those up.
No, I agree with that, Rachel. And then the savior complex refers to actions provided by people that help marginalized groups in a self-serving manner. So really doing to say, look, I saved this for people, but not doing it with the right intention. And then types of allyship. So advocacy, one we've kind of heard before, be an advocate, right? And that's one who defends or maintains a cause or proposal, one who supports or promotes the interest of a cause or a group, to support or argue for it. This is an actionable thing, right? To be an advocate is actionable, but let's be mindful that one size not fit all, right? So this looks how it looks for you. The way I advocate may not be the way that you advocate, but it comes down to us using some privilege or power we have to speak up for others. An example of advocacy would be being an upstander. So you've heard the term bystander, right? Like you're just kind of watching, observing. Upstander is complete opposite. A person who speaks or acts in support of an individual or cause, particularly someone who intervenes on behalf of a person or group being attacked or disrespected. And this kind of takes us to calling in versus calling out. A simple way to kind of think of upstanding, you have like different examples. The one is calling in. Let's say on this call right now, someone's specifically inappropriate, but I don't feel comfortable saying it on this call. So I might talk to Robin afterwards and say, hey, Robin, when you said this how was inappropriate, how did me feel? I called Robin in because we have a close enough relationship to do so, right? And it wasn't super severe to where I was like, stop everything now. Calling out is something very, very offensive or inappropriate being said. And me saying, hey, let's stop this. I have to call this out right now because others on this call can also be hurt by that. So calling in can be helpful if it's not a huge thing and you know the person personally, but calling out is more so this cannot be tolerated and we have to nip in the bud right now. So that's an example of upstanding, two different ways to do that. And then last but not least, we just talked about savior complex, right? And that kind of rolls into performative allyship. When someone from a non-marginalized group professes support and solidarity with the marginalized group in a way that either isn't helpful or that actively harms that group. So you think about savior complex, hey, look at me, I did this. That ties into performative allyship, doing something that could be as simple as going to a protest and holding a sign just for selfies on Instagram and then doing nothing further, right? Very performative to make you look good, but really not helping the community at all. So those are some terms to kind of keep in mind as we go through the remainder of this.
Yeah, I wonder if now's a good time to stop, Robin, since you're pretty aware of these tech moms that you've worked with, these different cohorts. Any insights that you would add, having worked with them, or questions that you think they might ask around these vocabulary?
I'm really grateful that you're going through and defining a lot of these terms because so many of these are really hot button terms, as you've referred to that before. And so I think the fact that that you are defining and I'm excited to dig into some of these a little bit more. How you mentioned, Rachel, that privilege isn't a bad thing. I know I've heard someone say before. She said, I didn't have any privilege. I worked really hard to get through college, right? Even though her father was a professor at that college. And I know, and so she didn't recognize, and I think she meant don't say that I had privilege. Like, I still worked hard, right? I still had challenges. Things were still difficult. And I'm sure you're going to get into some of this more, but I think it's really helpful for all of us when we're learning some of these terms and trying to understand them, to recognize that maybe our first reaction um, isn't necessarily going to be the best one. And so maybe take a moment, take a breath when we hear something that does make us feel a little defensive, and say, I love the idea of getting curious and say, why am I feeling upset? Why am I feeling defensive? What can I do to learn a little bit more about this and still be willing to listen and still be open to learn. And so I want to invite everybody who's listening to this, if some of these terms or whatever do feel a little bit uncomfortable, maybe ask yourself why and say, okay, I'm going to stick with this workshop and say, what can I continue to learn? And then encourage us to say, if I've got questions, are there people that I know that can help me understand things better? And then can I go to those people and ask them some questions? And so I love that both of you are here and willing to teach me. And then hopefully I can be willing to I can be able to share some ideas and things that I've learned with other people as well. So I think maybe that's all I have to say at this point. And so let's dive back in and keep moving with more of these ideas and concepts.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Robin. And as you know, any conversations around these topics are going to be tough. I think every time I have one of these conversations, I put my foot in my mouth. I have one of those calling in moments with Velshay where she helps me understand how I can be a little bit better, or other friends or mentors have done the same. So, Robin, I love that you're leading from a place of curiosity, wanting to create safety for folks to ask those questions and get curious about what they're feeling. So thank you. Velshay, anything you wanted to add here?
No, I think Robin actually set us up perfectly for the next slide. So I love how it's actually going to tie into an example I had. So this is great. Where to begin as an ally, right? That's the hard part, because we all have this space where sometimes it can be uncomfortable, even myself, right? And despite of all the identities I hold, there are still our privileges I have. So where to begin is educate yourself. And it's important that we say educate yourself, because this work is not on the shoulders of others. It's on the shoulders of you, right? So educate yourself. And the first thing is to unlearn. We have been taught so many things just naturally growing up that we have to unlearn. So societal norms. And I use myself in a lot of examples because that's the experience I have, right? Societal norms. Think about how I'm dressed. I'm a queer, masculine presenting Black woman. So I probably should have on a dress, probably according to some folks, a blouse, right? Because societal norm. But we have to unlearn what we expect people to be, right? It's the first thing. Why do I have this expectation? Where does it come from? And then how is that expectation feeding into stereotypes? There are so many different groups that we have that we just have stereotypes about. Women can't be great leaders. You can't run a business, right? And why is that? You're too emotional. All these things. But isn't emotion when you get, if a man gets mad, is that emotion, right? So it's so interesting how we have all these societal norms and stereotypes that really don't make sense, and they contradict each other, and that hold us back. So unlearn things you've learned in the past, but then also at the same time, simultaneously learn. And that comes from historic books, podcasts, videos. These days, there's so many resources. This is a resource, right? There are so many resources when it comes to this topic. So it's really about digging in and finding what's the best way that you learn. I love a good audiobook. So find something that works for you, and find those learning pieces there. Also, look around, and who are you hanging out with? Who are you talking to? Does everybody you know look like you? You all hold most of the same identities. And so, how can you learn about how to be helpful or an ally to other identities, other groups that you may not be a part of, right? So, diversify your network. Get to know other people who don't look like you, and do it genuinely, not in a way of, hey, I don't have any Asian friends. Let me go. Like, no, like be genuine in your discovery of that. So when you do that, the last piece of this is listen to what they need, don't assume. So you might say, hey, when it comes to folks who identify as disabled, right? Or someone who's in a wheelchair, oftentimes able folks just want to go and help. But did that person ask for help? And if also, are you helping in the way they might want, right? Or might need? So we often give what we think folks need, but I can't tell you what someone in a wheelchair wants. And then each person's going to want something different. So ask them what they need, and don't just assume, because we don't hold those identities. So who are we to say, I thought it's on TV? It's not a one size fit all. Talk to people and find out from them how you can be an ally.
I love this concept of unlearning and feel like it's, for me, it was kind of forced upon me. I shared at the beginning how I transitioned from teaching to tech. So all of a sudden I'm in these circles that are majority female, and then my rooms look quite different, right? The rooms that I'm sitting in. And I love, Velshay, that you said, just notice, right? Just get curious about the rooms that you're sitting in. One of the first steps that I often share with folks who want to get into allyship is just like count by identity, right? Just look around the room. How many women are sitting in that room, of the people who are holding the mic, of the people who have, airtime, who is speaking, what do they look like, what do they sound like, who do they represent? And I just think that curiosity is exactly where we're trying to lead from as we're unlearning. So thank you for sharing that.
Can I hop in with a question?
Mm-hmm.
Velshay, this is related to the thing that you said about educating yourself. I know that there's been a lot of burden on people who have like a very visible identity. So if I wanted to learn more about what it was like to be a Black person in America, right? Like I would think, oh, I need to ask this person, but that's been a heavy burden on people who
Hmm.
are already having to do this work. So I love this idea of educating yourself, but at the same time, I do want to diversify my networks. I want to make sure that I create true and authentic relationships with people whose lived experiences are so different than mine. So what is the way that I can begin to expand my own personal connections and the people that I know without creating a burden on those to educate me about what it's like? Like, what does that look like?
That's a great question. I think when it comes down to it, the first thing is doing the work yourself, because you can tell when someone comes to the table with nothing, right? Think of it as a group project. That one person, that one student who's not doing their part, pulling their weight, you can tell that. So I think it's important that you first do the work yourself, do some research, read things, watch movies, whatever it is. So when you come to the table, I can at least see, say as a Black person, I can say, okay, I can see you've at least tried to learn. And I can see there are some spaces where it's difficult, because for me, it's still difficult to learn about my own people, right? So I can see those spaces. But some folks, if you come to the table with nothing, it's like, okay, you want me to do all of it. So I think it comes down, number one, to the authenticity and being genuine. And I'm actually doing this on my own, but I understand that your lived experience is of much more value, or a lot of value that I can also use. So I think it comes down to doing that research and then putting yourself in space and learning spaces. So it may not just be like a social circle. There are a lot of like learning spaces or book clubs, right? Book clubs might focus on a specific type of book. You're in that space learning, or it could be some kind of community meeting, whatever it is, but kind of putting yourself in spaces where you can hear different opinions and perspectives without it being an individualized experience. Because I think if somebody came to you one-on-one, that's kind of what I'm a bit uncomfortable if we're not like really good friends. But if we're in like a training or a workshop or a conference or something that we all signed up to learn together, now you're hearing about the Black experience, but it's not just or one person just carrying the brunt of the work. It's a group of folks having a conversation. So I think it's really about finding those spaces you can go and learn collectively, and not just going to one person saying, hey, so what's it been like being Black? And it's like, all right, So it's being very intentional. It may not be easy to find, but I think that's a good start at least, because everybody in that space has a common interest in trying to work together in some collective way.
Well, and I love what you said about someone who is your really good friend. And part of this is I become friends with a person not to diversify my network, but to become friends with someone, right? And
Yeah,
and just expanding the people that we know. And I think maybe once you have that relationship of trust that you are really great friends, then it becomes a little bit easier to have some of these
yeah,
conversations, right? Okay,
yeah,
thank you so much. I really
yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah, no, of course, of course. And then I think like, so this next part ties to the example you just gave about the degree. It's actually the example that I had about this, about privilege, and how people sometimes feel a little weird around privilege or defensive around it. And it goes back to privilege is power. Privilege is not a bad thing, right? So it's not a sign you haven't worked hard. And that goes back to that example, like, well, I went to college, but the thing is that there's privilege in getting in college. So that was a great example, because I was going to say the same thing. I have 2 degrees, and that I worked hard, but also I had the privilege in having a family that set me up to go to college, right? I had a healthy household that supported me through college. Meanwhile, some folks may not have a family that supports them to do everything themselves. So it's like, yeah, I had to work hard while I was in college and do applications and get there, but I also had a foundation that set me up. So I literally was not just standing on my own 2 feet. I was standing on the shoulders of my family, right? So that's what that looks like. It doesn't mean I didn't work hard. I had a little bit of a head start, right? And then it's not the same for everyone. So while I may have the privilege of having 2 degrees, somebody could have 2 degrees as well, but the privilege behind their story could be completely different. So we can hold the same identities, all here identified as women, but there's still differences in our privileges of being women. So I think that folks kind of get offended, like privilege sounds like a free pass. It's not a free pass. It's just that a little bit of a head start in a certain way, right? Um, so that's what it's not. But what it is an advantage, a form of power. And we talked about this earlier, Robin, before we started, is that we have power. And though I was saying how I identify as a Black queer masculine presenting woman, those are a lot of boxes that are seen as bad in society, right? But I have a lot of privileges and a lot of power still as somebody who is formally educated, right? Somebody who has a job, somebody who is able-bodied. I have a lot of privileges, a lot of power. So I still have spaces where I can use those pockets to help others. And with that comes access to opportunities. Because as we know, there are some jobs you have to have this degree. Well, I have access to that because I have that degree, right? While somebody may not have access to it. And doesn't mean they should not have it. That's another thing. Privilege is unfair sometimes too. They should have access to this same role because they can have just as much or more knowledge than I have. I just happen to stick through school for some extra years and made it out, right? So it's like access to opportunity. So how are we using that to lift up others and give them opportunities as well? And then lastly, like I said, unearned. I have a supportive family. I didn't pick my family. I wasn't in the womb like, hey, make sure you give me the cool mom. It just happened. I was just born into a mom who loves me so dearly, and that just gave me a foot up, right? Compared to some folks may not have that support system. So it's unearned in some cases because I didn't decide to be able-bodied. I didn't decide to be, or to like say to have a family. I didn't decide certain things. I was just born into it. And it's about what are you doing with that? So things I was born into, what am I doing with those pieces of power I was given that I did not earn for those who were not given that and deserve it just as much as I do, right? So those are the things to think about when it comes to privilege and power, because they can be kind of like a little bit like iffy, like I feel bad about it, but don't feel bad about it. Use it as your power. Do something good with it. Rachel, anything to add there?
No, I think that's a good transition into this graphic. And this is called the Wheel of Power, or the Wheel of Privilege. And if you haven't seen it before, you can Google it. There's lots of different versions of it, but it really nicely illustrates what Velshay was describing. You can kind of go around the Wheel of Power and see where your identities lie. So I'll provide myself as an example. If I start at the top, I'm white. I do have post-secondary education. I'm able-bodied, heterosexual, neurotypical, mostly stable mental health, average body size. Currently, I'm at a point where I own property. I'm middle class, but have lived below the poverty line in adulthood. I speak English. I'm a cisgender woman, and I'm a citizen. So you go around that circle, and I mostly fall in that green to yellow space. There's like 1 or 2 spots where I've dipped into the gray. And what that means for me is that I have lived near the center of power or the center of privilege. And that gives me a leg up, like Velshay mentioned, that gives me an advantage. Yes, do I still have to work hard for things? Do I still have to get through my education? Do I still have to secure employment and jump through all the hoops to own property? Yes, I have to go through and do those things. But it might just be that I'm playing on easy mode versus somebody else who's playing the game at a harder level. I'd invite you, if you're listening now, to just pause the video and do that same exercise for yourself. Go around the circle and just notice where it is that you fall. A reminder that it's not better or worse. It doesn't make you good or evil if you fall towards the center or towards the edges, but get curious about how those identities may have played into your life.
Rachel, can I throw in a thought here that that just as Velshay before said that a lot of these privileges are not earned, they are unearned. At the same time, you're not to blame, right? Like I know that sometimes people throw around privilege as an insult, right? I hear my kids do this all the time, like, oh, that privileged person, all this stuff. Being privileged, it's not an insult. You're not to blame for the privilege that you have, just like you are not to be celebrated because it's not earned, right? At the same time, what is important is what we do with it, right? Not the fact that I'm white makes me a bad person. What it means is, what can I do with the privilege and power that I have to try to make things better for those around me? Is that a fair assessment? Is that the way you two kind of understand it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to that, and then Velshay, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. But my favorite thing to do, and I should have added the image here, but as I look at this wheel of power, is to add little bridges. You know, if I am at the center of power, I can build a bridge across. It is a lot harder for someone on the outer rims to crawl their way into the center. It's possible, but it is a lot harder. So that is my joy, my duty, to then look outwards, notice where I fall and where others may not have the same advantages of me, and to build that bridge of allyship.
Yeah, and Rob, I think what you said was perfectly it. Like, there's no shame or guilt in having the privilege. I think the issue is when you hoard it, when you just hold on to it, when you live life in an individualized way. Like, well, I have this, so you should be able to get on your own. It's like, no, look around, let's be realistic, right? So I think sometimes folks have a false sense of reality. Like, I got it, why don't you have it? Well, let's stop and understand. Folks have different stories, right? So it's really more so, how can I spread this knowledge? And even when Rachel's talking about being owning property, I'm new to that. I'm new to that. So I'm not used to it. But it's like,
Yes.
I'm thinking through how that's something where if you take that knowledge and spread it down, it's like, imagine how many more people can own property, because I didn't have anybody to talk to about this experience. So I don't even know what's going on. So it's just thinking through, like, even pieces like that where Rachel had to work to own property, but also let me sprinkle this down so that you don't have to work as hard. Right. So just different ways that privilege can look. I think sometimes we think it's just like, oh, race and gender, but there are so many pieces, like these nuggets that we all have. That's like, if you just kind of share some of that, that makes it, like Rachel says, puts their life on a little of an easier mode when they're playing the game, and doesn't make it like a cheat code, right? So if we could be a cheat code for somebody else's game, I think that's the key. But yeah, Robin, the way you explained that, exactly what I would say.
Hmm. I think at this point, we want to share with you some tactics, some actions that you can start using today. I love that framework that Velshay provides with all of those definitions that help us to really think about this without all the baggage, right? Without all the emotional baggage. Let's just think about the ways that these different identities or these different privileges play into our lives. Well, now let's talk about some things that you can do with the power that you do have. The first allyship tactic that we want to share with you is called amplification. This strategy I actually first learned about from the Obama administration. So despite being the sitting president with the most diverse cabinet in the history of the US, women and junior aides were still finding themselves being spoken over in meetings. This is an experience probably many of you listening to have had, where either you've been interrupted when speaking or you've had someone else take credit for your idea and then be celebrated for that. So what the women in this administration did is they banded together and they chose to amplify each other's voices by repeating the name of the person who said it and their idea. So an example is saying, I really liked Jasmine's idea to do X. Or after a comment by Velshay mentioning, oh, Velshay, that's a really interesting idea. What if we added to it this? Making sure that you're restating the idea and the name so that nobody in the room can deny where it came from or who deserves the credit for it. When I asked my friend Alina about this, she said she didn't even know this was a thing until she noticed it happening to her. She said a white woman colleague started doing this repeatedly in leadership meetings, and so she started doing it for others. It felt so good when it happens. And one way that Velshay has described this before is that you're really celebrating women's voices, celebrating the voices of the underrepresented in your room. It might even just be that somebody's shy and they don't feel comfortable speaking up. Well, if you can validate their idea, make sure that it is heard and that they receive the credit, they are more likely to speak up the next time. The last thing that I'll add around this allyship tactic is not only does it empower those individuals in your room, but it can change the behavior of your leaders. In the Obama administration, he noticed when the women in the room started amplifying each other's voices, and he began to call on them more frequently. So this is a tactic that not only can influence your peers around you, but it can actually drive your leader to more inclusive behavior. Any other thoughts, Velshay, you would want to add here, or any questions from Robin?
I think you knocked out the park. No, perfect.
Pretty straightforward. I love sharing this tactic because you can literally use it in your next meeting. Just notice when somebody who doesn't speak up often or who might have an identity that is further out from that circle of power, notice when they speak up, state their name and their idea after they talk, and just really celebrate. The next allyship tactic I want to share with you is something I call parenting out loud. this applies across the board, whether or not you're a parent. I tend not to call it live out loud because that feels kind of YOLO, but that is what we're going for here. We want to really be vocal and speak out loud about the choices that we were making in our workplaces to help others have the same permission to do this. You might have heard of the motherhood penalty, which is this idea that after women have children, over time, they receive about a 6% decrease in compensation. And it's hard to attribute it to any other factor aside from the fact that now they have children. There are some really interesting charts that I can share around this, but the most powerful one is that we do not see the same thing in men. There is either no change in compensation or men receive a fatherhood bonus. And after they've had children, it's viewed that they're taking their job more seriously, or they're the breadwinner for their home, they're the provider. And so they actually tend to be compensated at a higher rate. So what Parenting Out Loud does is it lets women in the room know that their contribution is no less because they have children. It lets them know that it is a safe space for them to speak openly about their childcare and parenting responsibilities. So an example of this, my boss used to do this really well. He was leaving work early for, he had a sick kindergartner, and he had to hop out and said, hey, I got to go pick up my sick kid. He let us know, and he didn't come back to the office that day, right? He might have logged in later from home, but he let us know, me particularly as a parent who was watching very closely, that if my kindergartner got sick, it would be okay for me to leave the office and go take care of that kid, and that I would still be viewed as committed to my job. You can do this also on your calendar or with your Slack status. So if you're leaving for a parent-teacher conference, if you have a dance recital, put it on your calendar, let folks know that that's what you're doing. And it then gives permission to mothers who are more likely to be penalized for those actions to do the same in a safe way. I love what Daniela says about this as well. She says, not only is this giving permission in the workplace, but it helps her to feel seen, right? Those tiny moments are really supportive in a time parenting is tough, right? It is really hard for all of us. And so this is a way for her to feel seen. I want to add here that, yeah, Robin, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, this is often an allyship action that I see targeted at men, because they're often in positions of power and not seen. Like, we always hear the thing, like, if a dad has a kid at a park, he's like the most amazing dad in the world. And like, if a mom has her kid at the park, like, of course, that's what moms do, right? And so this is, I would love to hear some ideas, and I've got some too, and because much of our community is women. So what does parenting out loud look like for us? Because in a lot of cases, we're going to be scared to do it until somebody else has done it first. So what are some ways as women that we can take this parenting out loud allyship tip and make it work for us?
Yeah, and I want to add, you totally read my mind. I want to add that even though we're calling it parenting out loud, you can do this as a non-parent. There are ways that you can lead by living out loud, and that gives permission to others to do the same. So one that I'll add, and then I want to come back to you, Velshay, and Robin, I want to hear your ideas too. One thing that I really like is when folks put therapy on their calendar. I know that doesn't necessarily apply to being a parent, though I think all parents probably need a little therapy. But it's another way that you're saying, hey, I'm a human being. And so if you put therapy on your calendar, maybe approve it with your boss first, right? Like, make sure they know that's where you are. But I had a peer in my last organization who did this, and I just thought it was a really powerful signal that just by looking on his calendar, I was able to see, oh, he's prioritizing his mental health, and that actually makes him a better employee. I don't know, what other ideas do you guys have?
So I think about when I start a new job, or something like that, it's always kind of, you have that space to kind of say, hey, I already have these days booked, or things like that, right? I use it more so as, hey, this is kind of how I live my life. So I might say we have a 13-year-old in the house. Like, I kind of lay out the lands, let them know this is my life looks like, so they can know to expect, okay, today I had a parent teacher conference actually, but since I gave that heads up, this is the life I have. My boss regularly asks, so, how's the kid? How's this? How's that? How's life? Right? All these things, because I always tell them up front, I have this, this, and this going on. So please expect these things to come up. And then once I put them on my calendar, that goes back to what you're saying, Rachel. People can see them. But I always, from the beginning, a new boss, a new job, whatever, I always tell them these are things I have in my life that can impact work. So they know, and then it becomes part of our regular conversation. Now we're talking about basketball together. You have practice last night, right? So, because they're telling me what they have going on. So to me, it makes it easier when I just kind of from the jump say, these are things I have that may impact work, but and they're like, oh, great, you're a human. And I'm like, yes. And I go from there. I always give the heads up in the beginning so they can know, like, these are my non-negotiables.
Mhm.
I love that, and just being confident and saying this is what I bring. So a couple of thoughts that I had, especially to a lot of our tech moms who are either moving into a new like professional world of work and not feeling as confident and is able to do that. So one I think is that if we are women, or I mean most of our community is, if we do have a little bit more of that power, so if we've been at a company for a while and somebody new comes in, then that can be a really great time to use some of these steps so someone else can see, oh, this is an okay thing to do here. Or if we do, if we're in a leadership position, a boss position, then obviously that's a great time to do it. And then another thing that I think we can do as women, if we don't feel like we have any of that power to do this, if we do have a trusted person that we see as having more power, we can ask them to do it. So we could go to our boss, our manager, somebody who's got a little bit of a longer tenure, and say, hey, I know why you're leaving this afternoon to go pick up your kid. Do you mind saying it out loud? So this starts to create a different culture and strengthen the culture. So I mean, that's what I think. If I were a woman just starting in a new place, it would be helpful to me if others were doing that, and maybe I need to ask for it in order to help support that kind of culture. So those are
Yeah.
some thoughts that I wanted to share.
Yeah, I love that, Robin. And odds are like folks are doing that, whether or not they're acknowledging it. I shared this once, and my friend Mike said, "Oh my gosh, I leave Thursday every work early. I leave every Thursday early for t-ball practice." He's like, "I'm already doing that. Like I'm already putting my life first in that way, but I haven't said it out loud." And so maybe one or two people know, but the power of him vocalizing why he's leaving work early really really helps folks to feel supported. I wonder too, Robin, as folks are feeling a little bit nervous about this, if there's also power in pairing this with really owning your recognition and making sure that if you're at a more junior to mid-level role in your company, that you are, as much as you're sharing your parenting roles out loud, you're also sharing your successes and your projects out loud, so that if anybody ever has a question about whether or not Rachel is good at her job, they see my Friday Slack stat, or they see my Friday Slack report, or I send my boss proactively updates when I've gotten a project across the finish line, or when I've closed a sale, or when I've made money for the company, so that there's not a question about whether or not I'm committed because I'm a parent. I can be good at my job and committed to my family.
Well, we could have a whole extra workshop on
Sure
making
could.
sure we are claiming our recognition, right? But
Sure
I love
could.
that. I love that. Just to say, let's balance this, that we're parenting out loud, to say we are people first, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm also killing it at my job, right? I'm also doing a fantastic job. That's a great piece of advice.
Yeah. The third action is really easy and straightforward, but it is to make sure that you are including underrepresented voices in your hiring panels. So this is a point where I like to ask folks to just reflect on the last time you were hired and think about how many women were in that process. For me, let's just do this live. I think there was one woman. No, there were 2 women and 3 men. So close to an equal balance in that hiring process. For some folks, there are no women. If you look at different identities, if I think about how many people of color were in my recent hiring panel, there were none. So just getting curious about what signal that might send to external folks about your company and how certain voices are valued at your company. If you can be really intentional about this, you may need to invite folks from other departments. And it just becomes really meaningful. It's not tokenism. It gives them a chance to see the way that certain voices are or not elevated in their company, and to ask questions. So in my example that I share here on this slide, I had a male peer who asked me to tag into a hiring panel. He and I were at the same level. And so we kind of just swapped off when we were hiring for a role. We swapped who was going to be represented, and he was up, and it was fine. But by the time we got to the final round of interviews, we had 3 female candidates interviewing, and the final panel was 3 men. And he noticed this, and he asked, would you be comfortable swapping me in that final panel so we have a female perspective in those interviews? And I thought this was really meaningful because he noticed, again, he counted, he looked around, he saw what dynamics were at play, and he was willing to take action, sacrificing his own seat at the table to make that representation happen. For me, I know at least one of those women, I think 2, asked me about what it was like being a working mom at the company. One of them had recently had a baby and was like, is this going to be a problem? She probably could have asked that question to one of the male final panelists, but I know that we were able to have a different kind of conversation because I was doing it and I knew exactly what that felt like. So this one is really not tokenism. It's about making sure that people have a safe space to feel represented and to feel heard. This one is really fun because you get to pick your favorite word that you want to put in your back pocket. But this allyship action is called the 2-second rule. And I first heard about this strategy when reading Good Guys. It's a great book. I would highly recommend it. I want to say by Brad Johnson and David Smith, but I always switch up their first names. But the book is called Good Guys. They say that when a discriminatory comment is made, you only have really 2 seconds to respond. So they recommend keeping a 1-word phrase in your back pocket at all times so that you can quickly respond. And like Velshay said earlier, call out the inappropriate behavior. So they like the word ouch. That's not really my flavor. So I tend to say what, and really just kind of ask the question like, what did you just say? And if the person wants to like backpedal from that, it gives them the opportunity. If they want to double down on being a jerk, that's fine too. But making sure that I respond right away. Other folks might say, yikes, really. Some folks just make a weird sound like, ooh. And really, again, interrupting the flow of that conversation so that discriminatory comment doesn't go unnoticed and it doesn't go justified. My friend Michael says that he's used it and he feels like it makes it a little bit more lighthearted and easy to call attention to this negative comment. And it shows the woman or whoever this comment was made towards, it lets them know that someone in the room has their back, which I think is really important. So again, my work is mostly in gender allyship, and I think this is one that can apply far across the board, whether it's a sexist comment, a fat-phobic comment, an ableist comment, a racist comment, homophobic, whatever. Keep that 1 word in your back pocket, and then you're able to respond quickly. Any other thoughts or questions on this one? Yeah.
I've just got a question for both of you, because this feels really scary to a lot of people, right? To disrupt a conversation, especially if we're feeling like we don't have a lot of power. And even if you are like me, which I'm not alone, a lot of women are like this, a lot of men are probably like this too, but I'm a huge people pleaser. I want everyone to like me. Like that's like my core identity is I want everyone to like me, right? And so what I'm asking for, and I'm hoping you're saying yes, is does this get easier the more that I do it? Any thoughts on that?
I think part of it also is, I think, because this is a great kind of like a starting point. Because let's say you say ouch and you stopped it. Now what? Now what do I say? Right? So I think one thing that's kind of been helpful that I've used in the past is bringing it to the group. Because now you don't feel alone. So let's say something is said, and we all know that was very inappropriate. I was once in a meeting and someone said those people, and I was like, whoa, wait, and I was like, I felt uncomfortable with that. How does the rest of the group feel? So now I took it off myself, and I've made it in a space where I'm in a space with colleagues who I know are allies, who I know are good people. And so I'm like, how's everybody else feel? And they're like, yeah, I didn't like that either. So now it's a conversation amongst the group about, yeah, I didn't like that. Maybe it was said this way. And I feel like it was a learning moment for everybody because we realized, okay, we're a collective, we're on the same page. And then also it kind of took it off of me feeling forced to say something. I just called it out. So it's a good way to kind of navigate and say, okay, how does everybody else feel? Because somebody in that space isn't going to feel like it's gonna feel like, okay, that was a little bit much as well. But it does get easier because you become more confident and it's easier. Some things are just hard to ignore. Sometimes you're like, oh, I can't just like if it's a very inappropriate comment about, well, women only are good for it, and you're like, okay, whoa, right? And you're not the only one most of the time. So I think if you at least bring it to the group, especially if you're in a group with folks who are like at least gonna say something or on the right side of things, that gives you a little bit more like a communal feeling to where you at least it shows allyship in that space and it makes the person feel like, oh crap, I messed up. And it's not just because Robin said it, but Robin, Velshay, and Rachel said it. So like that's a little bit more of an embarrassing moment, right? So that's something that I just use so it's not such an individualized experience.
Yeah, and I do think it gets easier, Robin. I think too the real benefit is if you plan this ahead of time. So if you're watching this, figure out what your word is. Is it ouch? Is it yikes? Is it what? Is it something else? And make sure that you know, because in that moment, you're probably going to feel a little startled and a little scared too. So being able to respond right away is meaningful. And like it says here in the slide, it buys you time to think about what you want to say next. So you don't have to have the perfect response to go ready to go right away, but then you get to make that next comment. So Velshay's suggestion, oh, that felt a little uncomfortable. How does the group feel? Mine tends to be, what did you mean by that? Or asking them to explain a little bit. Say, I don't think you realize how that landed, but I know there are a lot of next phrases that you can use here to educate. I will say I'm still not perfect at this. So I think the last time I heard a comment like this was somebody was making a comment about women drivers. And I was like, ugh, that was my response. And then I just said, I don't think we need to say that here. Something that was not perfect, but it helped to send a signal to others that they're not the only one uncomfortable with it.
Thank you so much. And something, just as part of this conversation, this is helping me feel a little bit more motivated, especially to think about this as an allyship action. So often the responsibility for speaking up falls on the person who's the target of the comment, right? Like if someone, is feeling it. So if you're a woman in a room and someone makes something, negative comment about a woman, but if someone's making something negative, a negative comment about something that doesn't apply to me, this is a kindness, right? This is a way I could take a burden off somebody else's shoulder who's had to defend themselves so many times and speak up for themselves so many times. So maybe it will help me like feel a little more motivated and help me overcome my fear a little bit if I can recognize, because I have a little more power in this situation, I can spare somebody the pain of having to speak up for themselves after they've already done it so many times.
Yeah.
And Robert, I was going to add, I think you made a great point really quickly, is that the discomfort that we have sometimes speaking up for others, others of identities we may not relate to or hold ourselves, the discomfort, compare that to like the discomfort being the person who that comment is targeted at, right? So it's like, oh, I'm uncomfortable saying this, but I can only imagine how they feel because it hit them, right? So sometimes that could be our motivation too. Like, okay, I don't like this, but I'm sure they hate it. So that could be our motivation too, in the sense that yeah, it's bad for me, but it's worse for you because this was kind of about you or about your community, right? So I love how you kind of brought up like I can only imagine what they're going through. So that could be a little bit motivation as well. Like, yeah, that's kind of what allyship is, being uncomfortable sometimes to save those who are even more uncomfortable because you have the power or the privilege to do so. So kind of using that as like motivation can probably be helpful too to give a little courage there.
Perfectly said. The last action, and really is my favorite one, if I could just leave this with you. The world would be better if we just believed each other's stories. If we can just learn to say, I believe you, when a woman or a person of color or someone with a disability comes and says, this is hard for me, or this happened to me. If we can just learn to respond and say, I believe you, tell me more. What is it that you want? This kind of goes back to Velshay's point earlier that we shouldn't make assumptions. I heard a story once about a woman who was interviewing for a top role at NASA, and the hiring manager was male, and he was trying to be really sensitive, and he's like, well, she just had a kid. This role requires a lot of travel. I don't know that we should hire her. She was absolutely the best candidate for the job. He was trying to be sensitive and to think about what it was that she might need or want in her life. But there was thankfully another woman in the room who said, we know she had a baby. You can bet for certain she knows she just had a baby. Well, she applied for the role anyways. So let's not make assumptions based on what she wants. Let's ask her. So this is something that I think is really important, learning to believe each other's stories. I'll share one more story here quickly, but Brene Brown in her recent book, Atlas of the Heart, talked about how she's actually kind of gone back on her previous thinkings that you can understand or read emotions in other people. She said, rather than trying to read other people's emotions, rather than looking at the Hispanic single mom in her workplace and saying, oh, I bet I know why she's crying in the stairwell, Brene Brown gets to just say, hey, what's going on? I believe you. And really, it's not our job to try and walk in other people's shoes. It's our job to just believe their stories and be a supportive ally that way. I did put this quote in here from my friend whose daughter is trans, wanted to make sure it was anonymous, but she shared, being willing to admit that we know more about being trans than you do and just ask us how to be supported goes a really long way. She said, listen to us, how we feel is real. And I think that's the best allyship tactic that we can use, is just learning to believe and support each other.
This is something that I've tried to catch myself on over and over again. Um, that I fall into the trap that I think is a pretty common trap of saying, seriously, like they're being oversensitive, like really it's no big deal. Like it's easy for me to look at some, like I see on LinkedIn all the time, someone will share something and like, I can't believe this happened. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's no big deal, right? And I have to catch myself in that moment and say, it did not happen to me. I don't know how big of a deal it is, right? I haven't lived the life that this person, and maybe this was the 1000th time that it happened. And so maybe one time wouldn't be a big deal, but the 1000th time was a big deal. And so that is something that I've tried to remind myself, is that I need to trust people, that it happened, like believe them, but also say, and the impact that it had on you, I'm going to take that at face value. I'm going to trust you that the impact it had was real, and not say, "Oh my gosh, you're being oversensitive." Now, I will say this is hard for me to do to my kids, because I think my kids are like, "What?" So anyway, I have a lot to learn and a long way to go as I'm growing in myself, but this is something that I have tried to do, to say, um, if I think that wouldn't bother me, so it shouldn't bother them, I don't know what their life experience has been like, right? So
Mm.
I have to just say, okay, I'm going to take that at face value. I'm going to try to believe you. And so I just, that's another circumstance where I know myself, I fall down short on this all the time. So I'm trying to do better.
I'm with you, Robin. I am not perfect at that one in the least. And I think in family situations, like you mentioned, especially, sometimes it's hard for me to believe those in the house that I live with. But I think one thing that has been really beneficial for me is acknowledging, like, my reality, my experiences, where I fit on that circle of power. That's the only reality I can understand. So I just can't possibly know what somebody else is facing, and how it might feel in that moment. I think you said that really well. Thank you.
Yeah, Rachel, I was gonna say you have to be comfortable with just saying, I don't know,
Yeah.
and be okay with that. Like, I don't know. Like, I can assume it's like this is this, but at the end of the day, like you say, I only know my experience, so I honestly don't know. If you say it's like that, then I believe you, because there are some things that I can say to people and say I'm being dramatic about, right? Or all of us can have a story like, that sounds a bit sketchy, but like we know because we lived it, but we don't know what we didn't live, right? So let's be comfortable with it. Just I don't know, and be confident in it. So that's a good point, because we all fall in that sometimes, especially, yeah, me too with my mom, like, girl, but I don't know. Um, so the impact of all these things we talked about, right? These great tactics that Rachel went over. What's the impact? And when you think about these impacts, granted, some of them relate only to work, but some just relate to life, right? Like your existence. If you're in a neighborhood where you're the only person who identifies like you do, or if you're wherever you're at, if you have a kid on a sports team, you're the only like family, whatever it is, this can relate to so many different spaces. So being an ally, be sure that you take this outside of work and just apply it to your life, because that's a societal impact. And overall, that's what we want to have, right? So when you do these tactics, the goal is to really reduce the feeling of isolation, being overlooked, right? And we applies to work. Sometimes, especially if you're working in a remote environment, it can be easy to feel isolated. So if we try to be there for each other in the meetings and create those spaces, that can reduce that feeling of just being isolated or being overlooked in the meetings, like Rachel said, with the amplification. So that can work there, or that can work in your personal life. Increased happiness or morale. That's just like the basic. That's always my goal. Just be happy. You have to go to work. We all have to go to work. I'm sure if we did have to work, probably wouldn't work. But we all have to be there 5 days a week, forever it feels like. So it's like, at least be happy in the place that you have to go to have livelihood. And if that can make work a little bit better for you and make you a little happier, increase your morale, why not, right? So really think about how we have an impact on the experience that others are having in the workplace or just in life in general. Increase productivity. That, and this is great too, because this can be work or home. You may have things at home. I have laundry to do all the time, but like, think about how your allyship, or just being a good neighbor, being a good person, being a good colleague, can help somebody just be a little more productive at work, a little more motivated at work. We all know what it's like to be at work and to be over it. Like, I'm not doing any of this. But when you're in a good mood, you typically do better, right? If you're happier in life, you just do better in general. Dinner might taste a little better if you're in a good mood. So it's just like, really stop and think about how you just being a good person, an ally, and really listen to somebody can just increase their productivity. Higher retention and tenure. People are not going to stay in a place where they feel isolated, they feel overlooked, they have low morale, right? So when we take time to just acknowledge others' existence and be there for them, they can stay around longer. We hate when we lose our favorite coworker. So it's like keep people around and make sure you see them, show them that they're valuable just because they're there who they are. And then lastly, relationship and trust building. And this is important across the board, I think, but it could be a little more difficult when it comes down to like leadership, right? Like your manager, your supervisor who you report to. And I think that when we have those people of power, how you all said it earlier sometimes, they could be the ones to use their voices for us. And that relationship is one that's really important because sometimes I hear like a bad manager makes your job bad, right? So if you have somebody, if you can be that person, that leader who can just kind of be that voice and show folks you really are an ally, you really are for the people and try and do better, they can trust you and come to you with concerns they may have. If they're a person who are shy, who's introverted, who may not be the best communicator, they can come to you and talk to you. So having that trust in a relationship can goes back even to how you say, how do we have folks who may not living out loud, parenting out loud. How do you kind of have that conversation if you're a quieter person? Well, if you built that bridge or you built that relationship, they can feel comfortable to come to say that to you. So really just set yourself up as a person who's a people's person, right? You're going to use your voice, you're going to use your power, you're going to use your privilege, you're going to use your personality, you're going to use your resources, whatever it is you have to really help others. Because the best part is this is the impact it has on that person you're helping, but also the same impact it has on you. There are impacts to being an ally. There are positive things that come from being an ally. You become a better person. You become more knowledgeable. You become more approachable. You become more effective and productive and all of those things. So it's not just a one-way street. It really is a two-way street. When you do the work, I promise that you also reap the benefits of it as well, just naturally when you're authentically in it. So keep that in mind when you're being an ally.
Yeah. I think one thing, I'll be just a bit vulnerable here and add, we've talked about building bridges across that circle of power across different identities, but knowing that we're speaking mostly to a group of women here, we have to lift each other too. I have left 2 jobs at this point in my life because of female rivalry. One was by choice, one wasn't. And if that is the kind of environment that we are creating for other women, that we are creating for each other, we are setting the worst example of allyship possible. So it has to start here in conversations like this. And we need to lift each other as you rise, as you climb up the ladder. Kudos to you. Great to you. I'm so proud of you for doing that. Now use that privilege to lift the women around you and never let a woman feel like she is less than because there's another woman in the room.
So we have some additional resources that I'll share these with you, Robin, the link to all of them, if you can like share them for folks to click on when they watch the video. But these are great resources that we'll just have linked for you to go ahead and use at your own time.
I love
Awesome.
it. I'm super excited to check these out. Okay, I've got one final question. This is a tough one. At the end, and I'm just looking for advice from both of you. I personally have felt scared many, many times to speak up, to stand up, to put a post on LinkedIn, to make a comment in a conversation, because I'm worried of saying the wrong thing. That I worry in my effort that I don't know the right allyship terms, that I don't know, you know how terms are changing all the time in lots of identity spaces, right? And you're like, we don't use that word anymore, right? Like I've done that. And so what words of advice do you have for someone who wants to be supportive, who wants to participate in allyship behaviors, who wants to advocate for other people, but she is scared of doing it wrong? What ideas do you have for me?
Well, to start, you're going to do it wrong. Like, let's just get that out of the way. You will mess up. You'll say the wrong term. You'll say the wrong thing to the wrong person. You will get it wrong sometimes. And that is hard. But to me, what's harder is knowing that I didn't say anything. So I would rather try and get it wrong than go my whole life not advocating for others. So maybe that's not encouraging. Maybe Velshay can share something more uplifting.
No, that's great because that's part of the learning experience, right? Because same for me. There are certain groups I'm more comfortable speaking with and certain that I'm not. Because I'm like, I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I'm a person of like disclaimers. I love to position myself. Like I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to this space as, you know, a Black. I love to say like all the privileges I have or like the positions I have in general to let folks know, okay, I know that I may not identify with you in this way. So when I say something, please know that if you see anything wrong, let me know, right? I think it's important to be teachable and to be like teachable in an out loud way. Let people know that you're teachable, that you're willing to learn, that you want to know more. Please excuse me if I say anything wrong in this post, but this is how I feel, right? Like, and folks are gonna know. Also, I think it just comes from your reputation. If people just know your heart and they know that you do good work and they know that you're trying and they know this and know that, they're not gonna say, "Oh, Robin's being a jerk." It's like, no, like you're gonna have a lot more grace for that person, right? So if I mess up, honestly, I feel bad, but I know that people know that I am trying. So when you are a person who's just trying and have a good rep for always just trying to be a good person, I think that gives you a little bit more grace, opposed to somebody who's known for being like rude or condescending and like that. It's like, okay, no. But if we know that you are like genuinely trying to learn, there's a grace there. So if you follow Black folks and you're like, use the wrong term, I'm like, Robin, is this, but you good, right? Like, that's the grace. So I think honestly, just who you are already gives you a lot of grace, Robin. Rachel said it, you're gonna mess up. Just be honest about where you are, who you are, and what your intention is, and somebody will correct you in a loving way. If not, kick them out.
I also have a quote from Maya Angelou that I love and I live by. She says, "Do the best that you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better." I spent a lot of my time writing online, and I bet if I went, well, actually, I have gone back like a year or 6 months in the past. And I'm like, oh crap, that was wrong. And that is publicly available for everyone to see now. But I was doing the best that I could with the knowledge that I had. Now I know a little bit more, so I'm going to try and do a little bit better.
I love both of those ideas, and the notion that we are going to make mistakes. I think that we talk about that a lot at Tech Moms. Like, perfectionism is not our goal. When we're writing code, we're not trying to write perfect code. We're trying to get something out there. And so taking the action and moving it forward, knowing that we're going to make mistakes, maybe that gives us permission to take the step, knowing that we're not going to do it perfectly. And
Mhm.
Velshay, I loved what you said about if we are authentic in being the person that we are, that's going to hopefully gain us a little bit of grace, as you said. And that and as we do more in building relationships with people, then I think their knowledge of us is going to help us out. So that is really helpful. Both of you, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me today. I found it so helpful and informative. I learned a ton, and I appreciate both of your expertise and experience and willingness to share that, but also your authenticity and talking about these issues that can be a little sensitive and a little bit challenging for us. So I recommend to all these tech moms, if you're not already connected with these amazing women on LinkedIn, go find them and follow them, reach out and connect with them. You will learn a lot from the things that they're sharing. So thank you so much. And we will see you next time on our next Better Way Thursday workshop.
Thank you, Robin. We're rooting for you, Tech Moms.
Yes.
Thank you.